Well, hello YouTube, Steve Patton with General Patton Bushcraft back with you with another video, friends, and I'm super excited, friend. The season 11 of Alone has started, and I got the recap for episode 1. Stay tuned. All right, friends, this is Alone season 11, episode 1, titled Enter the Circle. Now, let's get right into it, friends. We see the choppers coming up. All 10 contestants are lined up in front of their tents along the river. And here comes the chopper to take them to their locations. And the first person up is Sarah from Alaska, USA. She's getting on her chopper saying, "This is going to be the most miserable and greatest experience of my life." She says, "You better toughen up, bitch." All right, next up on the chopper ride is Dub from Michigan, USA. He says, by far the most remote he has ever been. And while getting on the chopper says it's going to be a lot like Santa Claus has slapped you in the face with a canoe paddle. Next we see Dusty from Arkansas, USA. He says, where I'm from, it's 104 to 108. So this is a big change as he gets on that helicopter. Next up, we see Timber from Indiana, USA. He says, I want to win so badly that I'm willing to leave a bloody trail of footprints in the snow behind me. Okay, we'll see. Next up, Michela. She's from Saskatchewan, Canada, says, this is the land of the grizzlies and wolves, but I'm not afraid because I'm the first Cree Métis woman on Alone, and I have the whole nation behind me. Next up, William, for his helicopter ride to his location, he's from Labrador, Canada, says that the terrain is thick with brush and trees, and a bear can just jump out and get you at any time. You'd never see him. Next up for that chopper ride is Jake from Idaho, USA, says a bit of luck is needed as illness and injury can happen, and mental toughness is going to be a must. As he's flying into his location, he looks out the helicopter, he sees a big old grizzly bear. All right, next up is Peter. He's from British Columbia, Canada. Super excited to see what kind of person I am after this experience, he says. Next up, Cubby. He's from Missouri, USA. He's the big jolly fellow. He says, landscape is insane, not going to be a walk in the park, and expects the worst. Next up is the 10th person is Isaiah from West Virginia, USA. And he says, I'm just reliving a childhood memory of parents allowing me to play in the woods. All right, friends, the show starts out with day 1. At 8:52 a.m. and the chopper drops off Isaiah, and he's standing up to his ankles in water. He's dropped him off in a swamp. He gets out of the bog, scouts the area. The Mackenzie River Delta is a maze of intertwining channels, lakes, and islands made over river sediment. The area is thick with thin black spruce trees and vegetation. He is looking for game trails and a permanent shelter location. In this area, the wolves are big, up to 6 feet and 100 pounds. He finds tracks, lots of wolf tracks on the mud, finds fish scales on shore of a small lake, and finds a grizzly bear paw print in the mud. And oh wow, scared for Isaiah. Not only does he find full-grown mama bear prints, he finds some baby paw prints. That means we got a mother with baby grizzly bear. Ooh wee, friends. All right, it's still day 1. The show moves on to 10:16 in the morning now. The show goes over to William. He's from Labrador, Canada. It's 44 degrees and he's 49 years young. First thing he does is gets a fishing net out. Strategy is to get some passive fishing straight away. No bow and arrows for William, friends. He's a fisherman by trade. He has no experience bow hunting, so he decides to focus everything on fishing, and then when the weather changes, he's going to switch over to small game later on in the season. I think it's a pretty good strategy for William. He puts the net out of the water, then finds a spot for shelter. Starts a lean-to style shelter. Then he goes back to check that fish net. Friends, William catches a big 24 to 25 inch predator fish hunted along the shoreline. It's a nice big pike, friends. And pike is Latin for water wolf. And while trying to free it from the net, friends, oh my goodness, he loses it. And this water wolf jumps back in the water. But pretty good on William, pretty good strategy. Day one, he catches a big old water wolf even though he loses it. All right, friends, it's still day one and the show moves on to 12:24 in the afternoon and the show goes over to Dub. He's 44 years old from Michigan, USA, and he's sitting there picking the lint out of his belly button. And while taking off his jacket, he sees what he thinks is a giant moose out in the field there. He gets out his camera, zooms in on it, and it's a caribou. Oh wow! Can't take caribou, can't harvest caribou. So he goes to work on his shelter, and he finds a nice dirt berm, friends. Remember, we said that the sediment is super soft. So he starts digging in the side of that berm. There's lots of dry firewood around there. He makes an A-frame shelter with the ridge pole across the center. And he tarps it, and he moves in on day one. Pretty good temp shelter. Great work on Dub. All right, friends, it's still day one now. 3:01 p.m. in the afternoon, the show goes over to Cubby. He's 34 from Missouri, USA. He sits for a moment. His wife said, when you get there, honey, sit down and just take in the scenery. So that's what he does. He sits down for a moment, takes in the beautiful scenery, and then he gets up, looks for a temporary location for his shelter, sees a squirrel, friends. And these animals in this area, they're not afraid. That caribou wasn't afraid of Dub, just sit there and looked at him. This squirrel sitting here looking at Cubby. He takes out his bow and arrow. Remember, it's handmade. He's a Boyer and a homesteader. He shoots at the squirrel, shoots and misses, breaks his arrow, friends, and he's only left with 8 arrows, though, only allowed to bring 9. Okay, friends, it's 5:12 in the evening now. It's getting later. The show's still on Cubby. He's collecting firewood, and we see him use some birch bark and his ferro rod. He's getting thirsty. He wants to get a fire going and boil some water, so he does a good job getting a fire going. He puts up a simple tarp shelter. It's open, but he's up on a knoll, so he has good sight, good vision. He wants to be able to see any bears or wolves coming in, friends. It is sure scary out there. All right, day one. 10:02 p.m. now, 10:02 at night. The show goes over to William. He's in his shelter, and he doesn't have a fire on day one. He reflects on the day, and he thinks about losing that pike, and he goes, well, just got to move on and keep going. Still day one, 10:59. The show goes over to Isaiah. It's 40 degrees. He's reflecting on his day. Feels real good, feels it was productive, so he tries to get some sleep. The show goes over to Dub. Dub's in his shelter, and he hears a bunch of huffing and snorting and leaves and stuff. He thinks it's a bear outside of his shelter, so he starts yelling, "Hey bear, hey bear!" And wow, we see the footage of this big old bear. The show lets us see it. This big old grizzly bear, friends, was right outside his shelter. All right, friends, day two, 7:41 in the morning. It's the next morning, and Dub moves everything out of his shelter, friends. That big old bear was right outside his shelter last night. So he says it is time to restructure that thing. He talks about hearing those bears, and he is super scared. He's got to refortify that thing, and rightfully so. So good on Dub. All right, day 2, 11:41 in the morning. The show goes over to Michela. She makes a nice A-frame tarp shelter, temporary ridge line with a paracord, and just drapes her tarp over it, makes a nice little A-frame. And she's been seeing a lot of ducks in the water around her area. So she starts making some duck decoys. Duck decoys, friends. First time I've ever seen this. Makes them out of some long grass. And they look really, really good, friends. She puts it on a Y stick. Sticks those things in the mud on the shore. She's trying to lure some ducks in close to the shoreline so she can shoot them with the bow and arrow. Very good on Michela. Never seen that before. She's another one that brought a fish net, friends. She gets her fish net out, deploys it, and she's the 4th person in Alone history that didn't bring any fishing line or hooks. She finds a bunch of wolf tracks in the mud, friends, along the shoreline. Okay, friends, it's day 2, 1:07 p.m. Back to Cubby. He's harvesting some berries. Stomach is growling. He's starting to get hungry. But he's focused on that permanent shelter, so he finds a nice area between 3 big trees, and he cuts a notch in those trees and with some snare wire ties a ridge pole, and then he goes to work making a bed. He wants to have a nice big comfortable bed, and his shelter's looking pretty good, friends. His bed's looking pretty good. All right, it's day 2, 4:12 p.m., and we go back over to Isaiah. And Isaiah is sitting there contemplating, friends. He's missing his family. He's feeling super alone, and he's doubting whether he should be there or not. He says he's got a super drop shock. His stomach's growling, so he goes out looking for food. And his nose starts bleeding, friends. He's eating berries, and his nose is bleeding. So he decides to do some passive fishing. He wants to put out a fish line. He gets that nose to stop bleeding. Excuse me, while he's putting that line out, he sees a big fish jump. So he's getting excited again. All right, friends, it's day 3, 9:09 in the morning. The show goes back over to Michela. She sees bear tracks out in the mud under the water. The water has preserved these tracks. And she's just saying, wow, this is the real deal. There are bears and wolves. It's getting cold. It's the real deal. Her Cree name means beaver hands woman. She goes out and checks the fish net, pulls it out, and finds it all twisted up, friends. So she untangles it, redeploys it, and the show moves over to William. It's still day 3, 1:17 in the afternoon now. William's got low energy, so he goes hunting for cranberries and for berries. Finds a rabbit trail. He works on and sets a rabbit snare. So he's got his fishing line doing passive fishing. Now he's got a snare line doing some passive hunting. And then remember, William's a fisherman by trade. He didn't bring a bow and arrow. Friends, on the way back to the shelter, he sees a bunch of smelt in the water, takes a big stick, smacks the water, kills a couple of them. And we see him smacking the water. He ends up with 5 smelt. So good on William. All right, friends, it's day 4 now, 8:36 in the morning, and it goes over to Michela. She's outside praying, outside her shelter praying. She's got a fire going. She hears wolves howling off in the distance. She goes down to check her fish net. Nothing in the net, but on the way back, she finds a fresh kidney from a squirrel. Looks like there was a kill on the shoreline the night before. This is a fresh kidney. She goes back, makes a fire. She roasts that kidney, eats it, and she says, wow, it tasted incredible. So good on her. She gets some protein. Okay, friends, it's day 4, 11:36 in the morning. The show goes over to Cubby. Cubby sets out to find some food. He's switching up his strategy. He's going to take a break from that permanent shelter he's been building. The big bed by the 3 trees. Looks like it's going to be a good shelter. So he goes hunting. He's got his bow and arrow. He goes out hunting. And the vegetation is thick. Friends, he could barely even walk. Friends, these black birch trees, little small skinny ones, are everywhere, and the vegetation is just thick. He can't even walk, friends. He sees a bunch of bear sign, fresh bear sign all over the place. As he's going through the super thick vegetation and those black birch trees, he somehow, friends, I don't know, the video doesn't show us, but somehow he drives an arrow through his leg. We hear a big scream, a big yell, and he's got one of his sharpened broadheads 4 inches into the thigh of his leg, friends. We see him pull it out. He gets his multi-tool out, cuts his pants away, pulls that arrow out of the leg. Friends, he says it fell out of his quiver, and somehow he stepped on it, jabbed it through the thigh of his leg. Oh man, good on, lucky for him, he didn't hit that big artery. But friends, he's about 30 minutes from camp. We see him put a compression wrap on that leg. He gets back to camp, friends, and day 4, we got our first casualty. Cubby taps out on day 4, friends. The video ends right there, and we're down to 9 contestants, friends. All right, that concludes my recap. Before you leave the channel, please consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, bang that bell icon, and in the drop-down menu, do select all, friends. All right, I appreciate everything you do for the channel, all your views, all your likes, all your shares, but most importantly, all your comments. Friends, 1 guy's out, we got 9 left, we got 2 women in there still. Let me know who you think's gonna win this thing. And please, please don't depart from the faith. And if you haven't already, use your free will, friends. Free will, use it today. Dedicate your life to Jesus. Ask him to come into your heart. He loves you very much. He died on the cross for you. Do it today. And as always, God is good. God is great. I see y'all the next video. Already got a date.